Dialogue is typically a conversation between two persons, yes? And that is the type of dialogue we're going to focus on for today. However, there is another type of dialogue called the internal dialogue. You know, sometimes when your character is having an internal conflict perhaps, and there's a decision to be made between two options, a dialogue can happen there, right? And we know about that. And of course, we have the type of dialogue where one person is talking to a group of individuals. So I know you remember those. Now, if it is that we have internal dialogue, and the usual kind where you have one character talking to a next, and then we have one character talking to a group of persons, then what do you call this type of dialogue? Look at this comic strip, and I am going to read what is happening. And tell me, how many dialogues do you hear? No, absolutely not. I already told you, no ice cream, and that's final. But Grandma, I didn't ask for any ice cream. Oh, I'm sorry, Nelson. I didn't see you there. Was just talking to myself. No. How many of you can relate to talking to yourselves? How many dialogues? Well, certainly. We hear Nelson and Grandma talking, right? So that is dialogue. But would the talking to the self be considered dialogue? Not so sure about that, even though we do hear people do it. But you know, they have a saying in Jamaica that talking to yourself, no problem. But to see if you answer yourself, somebody needs to check you into the word, check you out. All right. So this kind of talking to yourself, if you're going to use it in your story, if you do not want to convey that the individual might not be so mentally stable, then you would stay away from this talking to self. All right. Now, let us look at some general functions of dialogue in the story. Why do we use dialogue? What's the purpose? Along with literary language and story techniques such as narrative voice, suspense, flashback, symbolism, etc., dialogue is a key element of story writing that requires careful thought about how you can manipulate it to give your story depth and interest. So remember last week, we did say that in order for you to make your story appealing, you should use language well, craft your setting well. And another technique that you can manipulate to give depth and interest to your story is how you use your dialogue, how you create it and develop it to give your story appeal. All right? Another guideline, use dialogue to expose your character's motives. So sometimes when we follow the action of a story, there may be gaps. You know, we don't know exactly why a character would have taken a particular decision. So the conversation that happens can sometimes fill in those gaps in the story. Another guideline, dialogue is a more powerful way than narrative to express characters' emotions. So through the speech, we can get an indication of what tone we should be reading in. We can get access to the mood of the story through the dialogue that you create in your story. And write the dialogue to create individuality. What do I mean by this? Make a distinction among your characters or between your characters. Make them believable and authentic, right? Remember that you'll be writing perhaps realistic fiction. So when we hear people talking, we can make a distinction between one character as opposed to the next based on their language. We can move to describing these characters, interpreting who these characters are based on what they say. Following so far? I know you are. Now, how do we go about organizing the dialogue in your story? Now, I know from grade 7, you would have gone through the principles of how to punctuate your dialogue, how to structure and situate it in your story. But we need to review some key points, because if you do not punctuate your dialogues well, then you're going to lose some marks for your use of mechanics, etc., organization, and so on, right? So how do we organize dialogue? Remember that when you use quotation marks at the beginning you use quotation marks, sorry, at the beginning and end of the direct speech of the characters. And you do not place the explanatory words within the quotation marks. So only the direct speech goes inside the quotation marks. All right? If the explanatory words come before the dialogue, the comma appears before the first quotation mark. For example, Elaine retorted. You have your comma. Elaine retorted would be the explanatory words. Yes? Good. Then you have open quotation marks. I find the idea nonsensical. Full stop, close quotation marks. And you do notice that the first word or the first letter within the first word begins with a capital letter. Yes? In the direct speech, that is. If the dialogue ends with an exclamation point or a question mark, the explanatory words that follow begin in lowercase, and the dialogue punctuation still goes inside the quotation marks. For example, will you honor your promise? He questioned. So we have open quotation marks at will, close after the question mark, because this is an interrogative sentence. And then you have the explanatory words. And of course, you recognize that the word he, starting the explanatory words, begin with the common letter. And then use a new paragraph or move to a new line to indicate a speaker. So if you have two persons engaged in a conversation, person A speaks first, you would not continue the conversation when person B begins in the same line. You move to a new line or a new paragraph so your readers can follow well who is speaking. Okay? Then, if action comes in the middle of the dialogue, the first letter of the second fragment should be in lowercase. Example, at the end of the day, he bellowed, there's always more soup. All right? So at the end of the day, first part of the direct speech, we have the explanatory words coming in the middle, and then we have there's always more soup. All right? And note that the first part of the direct speech, you close quotation before you start your explanatory words. Then you open quotation marks when you begin the second part of your direct speech. And I'm sure all of these memories are coming back when you first learned these ideas. There are more rules. Research them and practice. Ensure that your dialogue is properly punctuated and carefully structured in your story. Now let us also review characters and characterization. All right? So we know that characters are the people involved in your story. And these are the types of characters that we'll be looking at today. However, we do have abstract ideas, objects that are sometimes personified and transformed into becoming characters in a story. There's a story called The Pilgrim's Progress, and it carries with it a Christian, teaching kind of principles and lessons with it. And in that story, the characters are actually faith, morals, long-suffering are characters in that story. So that's an example of how you can use abstract ideas to become characters in your story. You should check it out. It teaches you some very good principles. Yeah, man. And then we have this idea. Characters are those people whose experiences we follow. And when you write your short story, you are advised that you should not exceed having 3 characters. Sometimes 2 would be sufficient, depending, right? You would have a major character, minor character, perhaps. Remember that you're working with 400 to 450 words. So you do not have that time and space to develop so many characters and trying to give them, enough to say and enough to do in your story. So keep the number small. Also remember that your characters need to go through some kind of development, especially your major character. How has the character been impacted by the events of the story? Do we see the character reflecting? What do we learn about this person? How has this person changed? We need some diversity, right? Make your character dynamic instead of static. You remember the list of characters? Minor, major, dynamic, static. We have stereotype. Yes, and we also have another one called the foil. Now you decide how many characters you're going to use and what roles they will play. When you write your stories, of course, we're expecting that you use both direct and indirect methods to reveal your characters. The more indirect methods you use, the better, because you are giving your readers an opportunity to infer who these individuals are. And it makes for a better or more interesting revelation of the characters, right? And you would have learned that STEAL is an acronym that gives the avenues through which characters are revealed and interpreted. And based on the topic of the lesson, you would have picked up that we are going to focus on the speech, you know, the conversation that happens. What do the characters say? However, T means what they think. E, characters' effect on other characters in the story. A means action. How do we learn about characters through their actions? And L means looks, physical descriptions. Based on how a person dresses, how can we interpret that individual? So bear in mind, we're focusing on speech. All right? So direct and indirect characterization, you know the difference. What is direct characterization? What you will explicitly state in your story. So if you say Tom is annoying, that is direct characterization. However, if you say Tom pulls the chair from beneath the girl and causes a fall, how would you interpret Tom's character there? Does it say that Tom is mischievous? No, but based on his action, you would have figured that out. So we want you to focus on how you can use different methods of indirect characterization. And use of dialogue is that method that we are focusing on today. Now, I've said a lot so far. It's practice time, you know. What not to do. So whatever is coming up next, this is what you should not do. So we are going to examine in a sample how dialogue is ineffectively employed. And you need to ensure that you avoid this limitation in your own writing. Ready? Okay. So the specific instruction is, we're going to examine the following dialogue to determine if it is effectively employed to reveal characters. And of course, you know that it's not. But how so? Okay, let me read this for you. I sat in the yard and longingly stared at the ripe mango. Its distance at the top of the tree mocked my salivating mouth. As I was about to attempt climbing the tree, my mother's beckoning temporarily hindered my intention. James, she called. Yes, ma, I answered. Where are you? She asked. I'm outside, I responded. Come inside and do your chores, she said. Okay, ma, I said. I took a glance at the mango and smiled because I knew that soon its juices would slither down my anxious hands. Take a moment. Is the dialogue effective? How would you change it? What would you add to make it more interesting? Let me do a second reading while you think. I sat in the yard and stared longingly at the ripe mango. Its distance at the top of the tree mocked my salivating mouth. As I was about to attempt climbing the tree, my mother's beckoning temporarily hindered my intention. James, she called. Yes, ma, I answered. Where are you? She asked. I'm outside, I responded. Come inside and do your chores, she said. Okay, ma, I said. I took a glance at the mango and smiled because I knew that soon its juices would slither down my anxious hands. What do you think about this dialogue? If boring were an award, this would be a winner. All right, so we need to do some work to fix it. Now I wonder what ideas you came up with. How would you fix this? All right, let us see how we can work on this. Now I have a second option. We're going to look at it. And we're going to see how we have gone about modifying the dialogue in this second sample. Okay, because we do not want the boring award. All right, now let's look at this one. I sat in the yard and stared longingly at the ripe mango. Its distance at the top of the tree mocked my salivating mouth. As I was about to attempt climbing the tree, my mother's beckoning temporarily hindered my intention. James, my love, she called in her loudest yet gentlest voice. Yes, ma, I answered, with a wide smile spread across my face. I've always liked when she called my name. She made it sound very special. Where are you? She asked. I'm outside, ma. I had a feeling she needed me, so I stood up from a tree stump where I was sitting and started to walk towards the house that has been my oasis. You need to do your chores, son, then you may return outside, she instructed. Okay, ma, I'm coming, I quickly replied. I took a glance at the mango and smiled because I knew that soon its juices would slither down my anxious hands. All right, what are some differences between these two extracts? Think about it. What did I add? What makes the dialogue more interesting? And how has the dialogue functioned in this sample? Okay, while you jot your points down, you may have noticed that more words have been added to the direct speech to prevent the dialogue from sounding sketchy and abrupt. And it gives us, an indication of tone. Now, I'm not saying that you have to write lengthy direct speeches. You determine that. Sometimes it is the mood that you want to create that helps you to decide how long your speech will be. And the context of your story should also guide if you're going to have a short speech or you're going to have an extended speech in your story. So we have an example. Come inside and do your chores, she said, becomes, you need to do your chores, son, then you may return outside. So when we add to this, we realize that there is a loving tone. The mother referring to the son and then telling him that, I won't keep you inside for long. You'll soon return outside. So she sounds very friendly, very amicable, right? And she knows that he was outside having his time with playing or looking at the ripe mango. And so she's going to allow him to return to his pastime or whatever else he was engaged in. And then we have, the explanatory words have been expanded. Yes, ma, I answered with a wide smile spread across my face. So he was not resisting the beckoning of the mother, all right? And you may have noticed that the explanatory words have been revised to prevent repetition. So instead of saying I said, she said, we said, use synonyms such as replied, instructed. Those would serve as alternatives. The narration has been used to break the monotony of the dialogue in the first sample, right? So instead of having a flow of about 5 direct speeches, you have intermittent narration to make the story more interesting. For example, I'm outside, ma. I had a feeling she needed me. So I stood up from a tree stump where I was sitting and started to walk towards the house that has been my oasis. And we also note that the action in the narration is used to support the boy's speech, which gives us an idea that he is compliant or obedient, right? We also learn in the second sample that he's quite attuned to his mother because he could detect, even before she said, come inside and do your chores, that she wanted him, okay? So we gained access to the two's relationship, We know that the boy is obedient. We also found out that he shares a connection, a special connection with his mother. In addition, in the second sample, we learned that, the mother is quite warm. The mother says, James, my love. In the first sample, we did not get that information. And so we do recognize that we can indeed use dialogue to reveal our characters in our story. All right? I hope you were able to follow those ideas. Now we are going to apply what we've just learned to another sample. Ready? Your instruction. You are going to examine the following extract to determine how dialogue is used as a method of characterization. Remember now that we are using dialogue, direct speech, as a method of direct characterization. Do you remember what... No, I made an error. As a method of indirect characterization. And I heard all of you shouting in TV land that no, miss, dialogue is being used as a method of indirect characterization. Now remember that when you manipulate the method of indirect characterization, you are not stating explicitly everything about the characters. You are giving your readers an opportunity to decode who these individuals are. We should be able to read the dialogue and pick up on tone. We should get an idea of the mood of the story, right? The dialogue should fill in gaps within the story. Yes? So it should not be just placed in your story for the sake of having people talk. The dialogue should be more functional than that. So we are going to examine this next sample to see exactly how the writer has manipulated the technique of dialogue to reveal characters. Ready? Okay. And I'm going to try to use 2 different voices for you. Hopefully it works. Here we begin. How many times must I tell you to never visit me again? Nicole screamed. Please, please, give me a chance to explain. The sobbing man managed to say through determined tears that washed his face, I cannot continue to pretend as if I do not care about you. I'm sorry. And all I am asking for is your forgiveness. Forgiveness? You must be joking. You left me for 15 years. And now you want me to move on as if nothing happened? Just go. Nicole closed the door, and her tearful eyes to shut out the hurtful memories of the past. My. Feeling sorry for this man? Poor thing. Who do you think this man is, by the way? Let me see now. Let me see if I can access your minds. Probably you're thinking that it's a man with whom she was in a relationship. I don't know. What about a father that left this child when, she was young? I don't know. Well, we're left to draw conclusions. All right, look at the sample and determine how does the writer use dialogue. What are we able to interpret about these 2 characters based on the speech, based on the dialogue that happens between them? And while you think, let me do a second reading. How many times must I tell you to never visit me again? Nicole screamed. Please, please, just give me a chance to explain. The sobbing man managed to say through determined tears that washed his face, I cannot continue to pretend as if I do not care about you. I'm sorry, and all I am asking for is your forgiveness. Forgiveness? You must be joking. You left me for 15 years, and now you want us to move on as if nothing happened? Just go. Nicole closed the door and her tearful eyes to shut out the memories of the past. Every time I read it, I feel sad all over again. All right, let's talk about how is dialogue used. What did you interpret? These are some points that you would have come up with, perhaps. All right. So we know that Nicole lacks emotional healing. Yes, yes. She needs to talk to somebody, and quickly too. All right. And she may be described as unforgiving. The tone may be harsh. She sounds unsympathetic. You know, the man is crying, but the tears do not frighten her. She's not budging. She has not forgiven him. And she's deciding that, you know, this man needs to extricate his presence. Mama my. And then the man sounds remorseful. He says he's sorry. Yes? He's in a state of humility. And he sounds emotionally distressed. You know, he's begging, please, please. And I can't continue. Poor thing. Mama my. Boy, Nicole though. And like I said before, dialogue may be used to help your readers understand your character's motive, right? And that is evident in the sample. So what kind of motive do we recognize? At the start of the story, we did not know why Nicole reminded the man of her preference for him not to visit her. So we didn't know yet. However, as we gained more access in the dialogue, we realized that it's because this man disappeared. He left her 15 years ago, and all of a sudden, like a phantom, he has shown up on her doorsteps, deciding that he wants her to forgive him, right? And we realize that her motive is that she has not healed from the past experiences, and she has a desire to forget the past. And the presence of this man is a memory, or conjures memory, all right? So, let's talk about your homework. Yes. All great teachers give homework. The instruction is you're going to create dialogue that would suit a story that would be about this picture. Now, what is happening in this picture? We have a male and female. Could probably think that they're in an intimate relationship. Backs turned to each other. Look at their faces. Something has gone wrong, right? All right. Now you're going to practice to create dialogue. So let's talk about it. What are some ideas that you could come up with? Remember last week when I said you should not situate your characters in settings and cause them to become predictable? Well, what is a predictable story based on this picture? Immediately some of you may be thinking, the man cheated. Or, the woman cheated because her head is bowed lower. What a way you guys can analyze. All right, so that is predictable. But let us think about some ingenious ideas, man. What could have gone wrong? Instead of writing a dialogue where the two are quarreling about the fact that someone has gone out of the side of the relationship. I know you love the drama, but perhaps they too were pregnant. You know, in Jamaica, we don't say we are pregnant. The girl is pregnant or I am pregnant. But in other spaces, the couple was pregnant. Maybe they lost a child and they're going through a difficult moment. Perhaps. What else could you write about? What are you thinking? Maybe they are breaking up. That is predictable, man. What else? Let the story interesting. Let the dialogue be about some different ideas. And I can hear your brains turning. Think about it. Maybe they realize that they've fallen out of love. But it's not necessarily because there was another person in the relationship. Perhaps they've realized that they've grown apart. The two have different objectives in life. They are going on two different paths in life. That's another idea that you could think about. interesting. Maybe the man has been through a childhood experience that has caused him to become emotionally unavailable to the female, and they're not doing well with dealing with. So remember that as you create your dialogue in your story, what do you need to remember? Break the monotony of the dialogue with explanatory words. Good? Yes, because you do not want 3, 4, 5 direct speeches coming in succession. The explanatory words help to break the monotony and add interest to your story, right? And remember that you need to carefully punctuate your dialogue. Yes? So remember that the direct speech should be enclosed in quotation marks. The explanatory words, however, should not be included in the quotation marks. Yes? And when the explanatory words come in the middle of the direct speech, the second part of the direct speech, of course, would begin with what? The open quotation marks, then your common letter, beginning the first word in that part. Yes? So whilst it is that you seek to use direct and indirect characterization, you have to think carefully about what exactly you need to use the indirect characterization. What exactly do you need to use your dialogue to convey in your story? Do we need to interpret the character based on how you want to convey them? Or do we need to pick up on tone? How do these characters sound? Because you do know that sometimes when we read the character's direct speech, we might be reading it in the indirect tone, in the incorrect tone, sorry. Also, we can use dialogue to gain access to the mood of the story. We can understand the relationship that exists between two characters in the story. And what else did I say is another function of dialogue? Do you remember? Were you even paying attention? Yes, we can use dialogue to fill in gaps in the story. Sometimes the narration in the story, what we gain about, when we gain access to the action within the story, there may be gaps. And when we have characters talking, we can understand what happened prior to what is happening now, right? We can fill in the gaps and understand better the movement of the story. Yes? Good. And we can also gain access to the character's motives. So why is it that a character took a particular decision or engaged in a particular action? Based on the conversation that happens in the story, we can gain all of that. So do not have your character speaking because you want somebody to speak in your story. Use your dialogue purposely. Let it function well. And then you'll have better stories that have depth, interest, and your readers would certainly be appealed and captivated. All right?